Shabbat Shalom once again. And at this time, we have the great opportunity to hear from the great Kahan, Nearia Hawkins.
Shabbat Shalom. Praise Yahweh. Truly an honor to speak before the called out ones of the living Father. You may all be seated. If everyone would take your books to Yahweh and please open up to a familiar scripture to all of us, Revelation 18. Revelation 18. We're going to start off here. Revelation 18, verse 3, on page 982 in the books of Yahweh. If you notice, it says, "For all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. And the kings of the earth had committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth have grown rich through the abundance of her delicacies." I wanted to point that scripture out because you notice how it says all nations. The time period that we're in right now in these last days, as we've been taught frequently by Yahweh's last days witness and overseer of the House of Yahweh, that even in Genesis it speaks of this time. Remember, in Genesis 49, verse 1, it says, Yahweh, the man who was inspired by Yahweh, Jacob, called his sons together and says, "Remember, let me tell you what will befall you in these last days." And you just think about how amazing that is, brothers and sisters. That so many thousands of years ago, the 12 tribes, the sons of Jacob, the 12 sons of Jacob were gathered together by him. And this man had great faith in the plan of Yahweh. And he knew the plan of Yahweh. And he called his sons together because he knew that they would populate the earth because of the promise that Yahweh had given his father, Abraham, right, and Isaac, so that they could bring this plan about. It's amazing too when you think about the article about the stars, the amount of stars that they've found in the skies lately too. We'll touch on that a little bit later. But for the time being, when we live in these last days, and the nations are angry, and the wars are right now, everything's just sitting right on the teetering right on the edge of the cliff. At any time, the wars could break loose, and it just goes downhill really quick. Now, of course, we know we're waiting for that third part of man over that quarter part of the earth, and the three nations that are spoken of to be affected by this third part of man over that quarter part of the earth are Egypt, Syria, and Iran. Now, just recently there's been some developments in America. Of course, everybody's economy is still in bad shape, and the time's approaching when all these things are going to take place on the earth and on mankind. So right now, Obama says that he's going to change the strategy of the American military, and of course, him and his officials, they concede that his new defense strategy will increase the risk for war. If they only knew, and they could very well know what's coming up on, because even though they're trying to prevent it, they all have their own agendas. The Pentagon unveiled a new defense strategy last week that calls for sharp cuts in the armed forces, a move that increases the risk that enemies will exploit U.S. military shortcomings by launching wars while U.S. forces are engaged in another regional conflict. President Obama hailed the strategy as a smart, strategic set of priorities that were formulated based on the need to renew American fiscal strength with smaller conventional ground forces and an overall leaner military. However, Defense Secretary Leon Panetta said the new strategy unequivocally increases the risk to U.S. for war. So you can see how they're preparing for war, and they're actually increasing the risk for war. Remember, President Obama just said in his State of the Union earlier this week that there's no way they're going to allow Iran to And then no option was going to be taken off the table. No way Iran would be allowed to develop a nuclear weapon. And then here you have Russia warns that Iran strike could trigger a chain reaction. It says Russia strongly criticized Western belligerents towards Syria and Iran, saying that a military assault on the Iranian regime could cause a chain reaction that would destabilize the entire world. He said that, and this is in his annual television press conference, you see how they're preparing their people, and they're preparing the people of the world for war. It's a mindset. They're trying to get the people in and get ready for it. You know, they're conditioning, you know, their own people and the people of the world to be ready for war. Now here's an interesting bit of information which I thought was, you remember the war that Russia and Georgia had a while back? Georgia is a breakaway, not a breakaway nation, but a nation that was used to be part of Russia before they broke apart. And it says the U.S. builds hospitals in Georgia as it readies for war with Iran. The United States is sponsoring the construction. Now this is across the world now in the southern part of Russia, and it's just north. It would be to the northwest of Iran. So the United States is sponsoring the construction of facilities in Georgia on the threshold of a military conflict with Iran. A member of Georgian opposition movement Public Assembly has stated, according to the Academician, that explains why President Mikhail Saakashvili is roaming the republic, opening new hospitals in its region. Now listen, this is the official notification of this. These hospitals are an American project. The war between the United States and Iran is beginning in the Persian Gulf. They allotted $5 billion for the construction of these military hospitals. The opposition member stated that the construction is mainly paid for by the American pocket. In addition, airports are being briskly built in Georgia, and there are talks of constructing port for an underwater vessels in the Black Sea coast in Georgia, which would be for their submarines, of course. Deployment of the U.S. military bases on the Georgian soil, one of Saakashvili's mega projects, is he's getting kickback for doing all this, and for building these hospitals and these airstrips. And they're going to build him a new city. That's what they're telling him. It says the opposition member warned who would protect Georgia in case of Iran fires of missiles against U.S. military facilities on its territory. All in all, about 30 new hospitals and medical centers were opened in the former Soviet Republic in December of last year. And then the plan is to build over 100 more. So you can tell they're getting ready for war, they're preparing for war, and you got to have hospitals for your wounded soldiers, don't you? And then here's another, on that front, you know, you got the United States and Russia, you know, kind of having a conflict over Iran. Well, not to be outdone, of course, the United States and Russia have their own conflict going right now. The U.S. and NATO have some 1,000 interceptor missiles. The United States and NATO allies already have about 1,000 missiles capable of intercepting Russia's intercontinental ballistic missiles, the Russian deputy premier in charge of defense said. Along with its allies, whom the U.S. now persuades to buy ships equipped with Aegis combat system, which is an advanced radar system and attack system. It's an advanced radar system that can target anywhere on the planet, the way it's hooked up to the satellites and everything. An Aegis class combat system has the missile. It's basically just a missile system that can strike anywhere on Earth, you know, as long as the satellite link up is available. The overall potential can be estimated at about 1,000 interceptor missiles. He said the figure is currently approaching the limits established by the recently signed Russia-U.S. Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty. So that's kind of backwards, isn't it? They have a reduction treaty but they're building up defensive missile strikes, which also is just a sham because, of course, all missiles can be used in an offensive role too. Now here's an article that states that the war dance is in full swing. If the most recent wave of escalations in the Middle East is a bluff, it is a very convincing one. Russia and analysts speculate that a military intervention against either Syria or Iran, or both, could start by the end of the month. And it's already the 28th, by the way, so at any time this could break loose. But the time frame seems to correspond to the nature of the developments and the rate at which they are being announced. Barring a full-scale war in the Middle East in the next few weeks, we can think of what is occurring on both sides as a modern version of a war dance, a dress rehearsal for a showdown and a spectacle for domestic consumption, for the enemy and for the international community alike. There is widespread perception that the crisis with both Iran and Syria are nearing a climax. There is a massive Western naval presence off the coast of both countries, and the opening sides are conducting war games at a dizzying rate. In fact, it looks suspiciously as if the games are an excuse for them to keep their militaries at near constant high alert, a dangerous situation not least because an isolated incident or a miscalculation could lead to a full-scale clash. The diplomatic war is near a peak level as well. So not only are their militaries on alert and ready to go to war, but of course their politicians are also stepping up the rhetoric. Now here's an interesting article I thought was pretty pertinent. Listen to this. NATO drills for nuclear attack on Iran and Syria. During these drills that they were having, there was a crash between a French Air Force Mirage and a Saudi Air Force F-15. The story confirmed that the Saudi pilot and the two French pilots were safe. It says, but this report also confirms that the two-seat Mirage, and that's the French Air Force plane, was either a French Air Force Mirage 2000D or a 2000N. Both aircraft, in their later variants, are virtually identical and are used for the long-range nuclear strike role by the French Air Force. Now, the reason why this is interesting is because this begs the question, is NATO preparing to go nuclear in the coming Middle East war against Iran and Syria? Well, it certainly seems so. There are hundreds of Allied fighter bombers available in the Middle East that can hit targets in Iran and Syria. Why bring in the specialized long-range nuclear-capable Mirages? It's because this is going to go nuclear. Of course, we know it is because of the third part of man over that quarter part of the earth. Currently, within the last week or so, and listen to how everything is building. The following battle forces have been assembled by NATO in the Middle East. A massive war armada is sitting just off the coast of the Straits of Hormuz, just south of the Straits of Hormuz. It consists of 3 U.S. Navy supercarrier battle groups, the USS Carl Vinson, the USS John Stennis, and the USS Abraham Lincoln. Each battle group generally has 4 or 5 Aegis air defense cruisers and destroyers, and usually 1 to 3 other destroyers and or frigates, plus a large support ship and 1 or 2 hunter-killer nuclear submarines. Additionally, there are up to 3 other large flat tops, U.S. Navy assault carriers and their battle groups. These include the USS Macon Island with its U.S. Marine Corps Harriers and various Marine attack and assault helicopters. The Macon Island has the capability to offload Marine amphibious assault crafts, and its battle group is accompanied by the USS New Orleans and the USS Pearl Harbor, both very powerful assault ships capable of launching large numbers of Marine amphibious crafts. So you see, not only do they have their air power there, but they have their actual manpower, boots on the ground, so to speak. Additionally, the French Navy has brought in its top-of-the-line nuclear carrier, the Charles de Gaulle, with its battle group. The British Royal Navy has added its local fleet to the most powerful warship, the destroyer, the HMS Daring. The combination of the French carrier and the U.S. supercarriers means that fully 1/3 of all the nuclear-powered aircraft carriers on Earth are now assembled in the Strait of Hormuz, near the Strait of Hormuz. In addition to all of this, the U.S. Army has rushed into Kuwait 3 combat brigades, which are 5,000 each, so 15,000 troops on the ground in Kuwait. 2 are powerful mechanized brigades, and the third is an Army aviation brigade with vast numbers of attack and assault helicopters. Thousands of U.S. Air Force troops were airlifted into Israel, along with the most advanced anti-missile technology that America has over the last 2 weeks. Now, of course, they said that they canceled this exercise that they were having, where the Americans went over and they were supposed to remember they were supposed to have the largest exercise ever in the history of America-Israel relations. Well, before they canceled it, they had been moving troops and equipment into the area. So I think they're there. They're just not having. They could be having their exercise, just not, having it public. Both Russia and China have been very vocal in opposing any new war in the Middle East. However, Russia warnings have been very clear, stating that any attack on Tehran would be considered an attack on Moscow. To make this point crystal clear, the Russian strategic missile forces have suddenly begun a high alert drill. According to RIA Novosti, the drill involves the latest and most dangerous nuclear-armed Russian ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles. Russia's strategic missile forces are holding a series of exercises to practice putting road mobile missile systems on high alert. The exercises involve the Topol and the Sickle and Yars mobile systems stationed in central Russia and Siberia. The units are armed with Topol, Yars missiles, will be practicing patrolling, camouflaging, and launch preparation procedures for high alert drills from the middle of January until the beginning of February. While the world's attention is on the GOP presidential race and the Eurozone crisis, war clouds are gathering in the Middle East, and the entire planet is at risk. A risk that is greater than it faced almost half a century ago with the Cuban Missile Crisis. And then this is just currently what they're doing to prepare for war, right? But at the same time, Russia and America have multiple nuclear weapons that are still on the hair trigger alert. Remember, they were the last 2 superpowers, Russia has been dismantled, and America is the chief nation of all nations, remember, where the House of Yahweh was established. Another prophecy. Multiple nukes on hair trigger alert. The National Resources Defense Council reports that Russia currently has 8,200 nuclear warheads aimed at the United States. At the same time, the United States currently has 7,000 offensive nuclear warheads aimed at Russia on its silos and command centers. Thousands of these, now that's 15,200 nuclear missiles on not all of them are on hair trigger alert, but thousands of these nuclear missiles aimed at Russia and the United States are on a hair trigger alert. So thousands of the 15,200 are. So, I mean, at any time, of course, the situation could go bad. When the war starts, the President of the United States and the head of Russia have less than 10 minutes to decide if the attack is real and launch their missiles. So you see, they're expecting the war to start. Now, of course, this will be a little later on, after the third part of man over that quarter part of the earth. But the devastation is going to be great upon the earth. When 4/5 of mankind is killed because they won't keep Yahweh's laws. And then, of course, you're going to throw China in the mix. President Barack Obama has vowed to focus on Asian security lately, as he says the risks such as China and North Korea. He comes right out and says, that China is a security risk, and so is North Korea. The ministry spokesman said China would observe the impact of the new military strategy outlined by the United States. So not only do you have America and Russia, with missiles pointed at each other, I'm sure America has missiles pointed at China too. And China probably has missiles pointed at America. China's Ministry of Defense today warned that the U.S. to be careful in its words and actions. China warned China's Ministry of Defense today warned the U.S. to be careful in its words and actions as it made moves to strengthen its military bases across Asia. So you have the major powers of the world threatening one another. But at the same time, listen to this, I thought this was interesting. China begins to turn against Iran. Iran slipped further into global isolation as China, its traditional ally, warned Tehran against its pursuit of nuclear weapons. After a visit to the Gulf in which he met leaders of the states most threatened by Iran's aggressive foreign policy, the Chinese premier issued Beijing's clearest condemnation yet. China adamantly opposes Iran developing and possessing nuclear weapons, he said. China appears to have sent a message to Iran that it could not rely on Beijing's unstinting support by reducing its import of oil at the time when the U.S. and Europe are promoting an embargo on the country. The Washington Post reported that China trimmed its oil imports from Iran in January from daily average of around 550,000 barrels to 285,000 barrels. Chinese foreign policy experts said that the statement demonstrated that Beijing would not allow its international position to end up beholden to Iran. Iran would not have wanted China to make this statement, but Iran must understand that if it comes down to a choice, China will not alienate itself from the rest of the world for the sake of a single country. So you can see they can't get around the prophecies that are written in the book, in the scriptures. Remember, Iran is prophesied to be pretty much annihilated, and the time is drawing near. Even their allies say they won't stick with them. They must know something, huh? Radioactive material stolen from Egyptian plant. I thought this was interesting. Radioactive material has been stolen from a nuclear power station in Egypt's Mediterranean coast that was a scene of violent protests last week, state-run Al Aram newspaper reported. A safe containing radioactive material at the Daba nuclear power plant, which is still under construction, was seized, while another, also containing radioactive material, was broken apart and its contents taken. In Vienna, an official for the UN nuclear agency said he could not give any details on the nature of the stolen items. We are in touch with the Egyptian authorities, the official from the International Atomic Agency said. The government has alerted security authorities and asked that specialized teams help in the search for the stolen material. So one didn't know Iran had nuclear material available to them, and now they don't. Somebody stole it. U.S. outrage as Egypt bars Americans from leaving. Now this was interesting because you remember what occurred in Iran in 1979 with the hostages that were held in Iran. Well, now Egypt, all of a sudden, 6 Americans working for publicly funded U.S. organizations promoting democracy. Remember, these are the organizations that brought the downfall of Hosni Mubarak in Egypt. Have been barred from leaving the country, provoking angry demands in Washington that Cairo's new military rulers stop endangering American lives. So these people are trying to leave, and the Egyptian government or the Egyptian military, they're not really clear on who did it, won't let these Americans leave. So we could have another hostage situation in Egypt like we did in Iran, 40 years ago. Now here's an interesting one. The Muslim Brotherhood won a majority of the seats in Egypt as part of their government. They won over 70% of the seats in their government. The Muslim Brotherhood comes up with a neat trick to break the peace treaty with Israel without formally doing so. Egypt's next likely ruling party says it simply will hold a referendum and let the people decide whether they want to have peace with Israel. Now this is pretty interesting because it was about a month and a half ago. I was watching some news, and they were showing a big demonstration occurring in Egypt, and it was like 1 million people there, and they started chanting, "Onward to Jerusalem, martyrs in the millions." So you can see how this situation has become more tense and more on the brink of breaking loose war in the Middle East than it ever has before. And then just last week, I was watching some more news, and I saw where they were having a soccer match. And at the beginning of the soccer match, before they even had the soccer match, the whole stadium was saying, "It's time for a new Holocaust." They started chanting this. So you can see how they're whipping up their people for these wars that are coming. They're preparing the people's minds for war. Instead of changing the hearts and minds to peace and to love with the laws of Yahweh and the peaceful solution, they're preparing them for war and to kill and to hate one another. It says, the Deputy Supreme Leader of the Muslim Brotherhood told a London-based newspaper that it respects international treaties and will leave the issues of peace of the peace treaty in the hands of the people. The pact was signed by then Egyptian President Anwar Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin. But a cold peace has set in over the past several years. People will express their opinions on it. All parties will consider the treaty, and Egyptians haven't had their say yet, he explained. We won't violate any treaty. We can put it to a referendum among our people or parliament. The ploy would ostensibly take the focus off the radical Muslim party and on the whole, nation of Egypt. However, the Brotherhood has no intention of recognizing Israel. I'll never allow myself to sit down with a criminal who will not deal with the Israelis by any means. You can see how that's progressing along. Democracy. So democracy gives you war. Iranian submarines ambush for U.S. aircraft carriers in the Persian Gulf. The Iranians have diesel-powered submarines that can sit on the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico and have the capability to fire missiles and torpedoes at the same time. That's all the war. That's the skill and the craft of warfare. Iran hits back EU with its own oil embargo. They just had said recently that the EU was gonna boycott Iranian oil, and so the Iranians said, and this was supposed to take place on July 1st, and so the Iranians said, well, why wait till July 1st? We'll do it next week. So they're thinking about cutting off their oil on tomorrow, first day. So that might blow up in their face because their economies are in really bad shape. And then you have Dennis Ross, who used to be the negotiator for the United States in the peace treaty, remember, between Israel and Palestinians. He says the U.S. president has made it very clear that he would be willing to use force if necessary in Iran. There's some more information about the Muslim Brotherhood and how they will not deal with Israel. They're not sit down with Israel. I already told you about the radioactive material. And then here you have the new UN draft resolution gives Syria 15 days to comply. A copy of the draft resolution on Syria currently being discussed inside the UN Security Council calls the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad to hand over power to his deputy and says additional measures will be taken if he doesn't comply within 15 days. And that was just yesterday. Now here's some interesting information. Researchers from 100+ countries prove sunlight prevents cancer. 100 countries. Praise Yahweh. Just like our righteous teachers taught us. Here, I thought this was interesting. Now, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. An otherworldly discovery, billions of other planets. Astronomers said Wednesday that each of the 100 billion stars in the Milky Way galaxy alone probably has at least one companion planet. An average adding credence to the notion that planets are as common in the cosmos as grains of sand on the beach. Isn't that amazing? The finding underscores a fundamental shift in scientific understanding of planetary systems. Our own solar system, considered unique not so long ago, turns out to be just one among billions. Billions of habitable planets in the Milky Way. Same subject, the scouring millions of stars in the night sky over 6 years, researchers found that the majority of the 100 billion stars in the Milky Way have planets similar to Earth, Mercury, Venus, or Mars, the other similar planets in our solar system. They estimated that in our galaxy there are about 10 billion stars with planets in the habitable zone, the distance from the star where solid planets can be found. many which could, in theory, be capable of supporting life. A German research fellow at St. Andrews University said, even if life existed on only one planet in each galaxy, there would still be 100 billion in the universe. Isn't that amazing? We still don't have the evidence of life on another planet, and we could be unique, but confronted with these numbers, it seems highly unlikely. Okay, now here real quick, I'll end on this one. There's some other just great ones. Doomsday clock ticks 1 minute towards destruction, so now we're at 5 minutes to midnight. I won't even say them too. Now, who do you think who do you think the Vatican's supporting in the next election? Romney rolls out former Vatican envoy's endorsement. Republican White House hopeful Mitt Romney, a Mormon facing doubts about his conservative credentials, said Saturday he had the endorsement of 5 former U.S. ambassadors to the Vatican. Romney's campaign unveiled a letter from the ex-envoys hours before the debate, which was a face-off against his rivals, including Catholics Rick Santorum and Newt Gingrich, who have cast him as a weak-kneed moderate. So there you go, brothers and sisters. The time's drawing near. The nations continue to prepare for war. And of course, they're angry and getting more angry, more confused because they don't keep the laws of Yahweh. They don't love their neighbor. And they just want to kill each other and take each other's stuff. That's just the way, that's the mentality of the world. If you all please stand, it's an honor speaking to you, and I have the honor and privilege to present to you the great Kahan Zephaniah Hawkins.
Shalom, everyone. Please be seated. Again, we have more news, and as the Kahan was bringing out, all this news really proves Israel Hawkins right, the House of Yahweh, the Scriptures, and the prophecies. Our first story, I mean, they really could end every news story with, we were wrong and Israel Hawkins was right. Which would be kind of funny. We could do that. But the first story is about fried foods, and it says that they're healthy as long as you're using the right oil, which is exactly what Israel Hawkins told us. You can't use lard. The second story, which is really from 2008, it's actually an interview with General Wesley Clark, who is the Supreme Allied Commander of Europe NATO, which is a very high position in the military. But it's him explaining how back in 2001, he was informed of all of these wars that are taking place now, that they were going to occur with Libya, with Syria, with Iran, and with Iraq, and that we were going to take over all these countries. So it shows how this was pre-planned. The third one is, he's an analyst, he's an economist, his name is Michel Chossudovsky. He's a little long-winded, but he's so accurate in what he's talking about. You have to listen carefully to what he's saying. His analysis of what's going on matches exactly with Scriptures. And he wrote 3 books, and one is The Globalization of Poverty, which I think is an interesting title, Towards a World War III Scenario, The Dangers of Nuclear War. And he calls these wars of conquests, which matches Scripture too, conquering and to conquer. And keep in mind that conquest means to acquire by force. So what we're looking at is thefts, is what's going on. And it's really all about the oil, which also matches the Scripture. So let's play the video.
Pay close attention. What you are seeing today is fulfilling Bible prophecy. Welcome to YPN News, bringing you the news as it relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yisrayl Hawkins. Katan, more and more people are realizing what Yisrayl Hawkins has been teaching about Bible prophecy is 100% accurate. Now, we have 2 great interviews to talk about this week. One from a retired General Wesley Clark, which was actually recorded March 2nd, 2007, and the second one from Michel Chossudovsky, the author of the book Globalization of Poverty and the New World Order.
Now, both of these men are speaking about world events, and what they have to say lines up exactly with what Yisrayl Hawkins has been teaching for over 30 years now.
But before we talk about their interviews, our field correspondent Larry McGee has been on a tasty assignment looking into this new research that shows fried foods are healthy for you.
Provided, of course, you use the right cooking oil. Now, Larry, what do you have for us this week?
Thanks, Katan. Exciting news this week for fried food lovers. According to a 10-page study recently released by the British Medical Journal, fried foods are okay. The study, which was conducted in Spain and followed 40,000 people over the course of 10 years, found absolutely no correlation between foods fried in olive and sunflower oil and coronary heart disease, which is a major cause of death in most industrialized nations. For restaurant owner and chef Jasper Mirabile, however, interviewed for Missouri's KMBC, the study doesn't come as any surprise. They've been sauteing in olive oil for years. The secret, Mr. Mirabile relates, is in the quantity. You don't have to use a cup of olive oil to fry a chicken or beef cutlet, Mr. Mirabile said. 3 or 4 teaspoons is more than enough. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Katanja, back to you.
Wow. I sure do love fried foods. I'm looking forward to that. Well, now we're going to go ahead and take a look back 5 years ago as we recall an interview between Democracy Now! And retired U.S. General Wesley Clark on March 2, 2007. Now, General Clark explained that about 10 days after the 9/11 attacks, that a general at the Pentagon revealed to him that the United States government had decided to go to war with Iraq. When he questioned the general as to what the deciding factor was for going to war, well, his response was, I don't know.
Now he continued, it's like we, the U.S. government, don't know what else to do. It's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we know how to take down governments. When General Clark returned a few weeks later and was asked if we're still going to war with Iraq, the other general replied, it's worse than that.
General Clark said that he was handed a sheet of paper that had a list of 7 countries that the United States had plans to take out in 5 years. Those countries are Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off the list, Iran.
Wow. Now, in our second interview, we look at the author and analyst Michel Chossudovsky and his comments on the events centered around the oil-rich Middle East countries. He said, well, this rhetoric directed against Iran has been ongoing for several years. In fact, it started in the immediate wake of the invasion of Iraq. And I think what's important to understand is that the United States, NATO, as well as Israel are involved and have been involved in planning a war directed against Iran. And what they want is to essentially have support of public opinion, present Iran as a threat to global security due to its alleged nuclear weapons, which Michel Chossudovsky says it doesn't have, and of course, then present justification and a pretext for humanitarian intervention on behalf of the international community. Now listen to what Chossudovsky had to say about all of this leading into a World War III scenario.
What I think people have to understand is A, Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons, and B, there are a number of European countries which are considered to be non-nuclear states which have nuclear weapons, and I'm talking about Belgium, Holland, Germany, Italy, and Turkey. These are 5 non-nuclear states which have nuclear weapons made in America, stationed in their military bases, and these are, in fact, targeted at Iran. It's a clear case of distortion and double standards. It's to build a war pretext incident, and I think what is very serious here is that if any kind of military action directed against Iran will immediately lead to escalation. Namely, at the moment we have 3 distinct war theaters in the Middle East. We have Afghanistan and overflowing into Pakistan on the one hand, we have Iraq and Palestine. Now, the moment there is any kind of military action, punitive action directed against Iran, that whole region will flare up from the eastern Mediterranean right to the Chinese border. And we must also understand that this action against Iran is also indirectly targeting two main countries, China and Russia, which have extensive military cooperation agreements with Iran. And consequently, this has to be understood as part of a global war. If there is an attack on Iran, I think we must understand that we are potentially in a World War III scenario. That whole region flares up, and if other countries intervene, such as China or Russia, even in a passive way, we are in a World War III scenario.
Now, Chusudowski also said, I know for a fact that this war has been prepared since late 2004 in terms of stockpiling weapons, establishing a state of readiness. All that's underway. Just about a year ago, the United States sent in a mission to Israel to modernize their air defense system. The air defense system of Israel is now integrated into the United States and NATO. That, in effect, what we are seeing is the coalition of an alliance of the United States, NATO, and Israel. It's a formidable force in terms of capabilities.
The issue is that U.S. military planners are often unaware of the broader consequences of their actions. They defined back in 2002, 2003, the notion that U.S. tactical nuclear weapons, what they call the mini nukes, are harmless to the surrounding civilian population. In fact, the Senate then approved the use of these tactical nuclear weapons in a conventional war theater, and they said they could in fact be used they could be used on a preemptive basis against Iran and even against other countries. So that what the nuclear doctrine is telling us is that we can actually use these nuclear weapons as humanitarian bombs, because civilians won't be affected. The only thing we're going to do is to go after the bunkers it's a bunker buster technology, and so that it's an extremely dangerous crossroads in which we are today.
Now, he continued by saying the United States has launched a military venture at the global level with its NATO allies. Those who decide on these military actions believe their own propaganda. They actually believe that they are going to make the world safer by waging a nuclear attack on Iran, and they may also believe that Iran is a threat.
So, the whole propaganda ploy which is presented in the Western media has gotten completely out of whack. It's a propaganda ploy which justifies actions which could be devastating, he said.
Now, the constant and persistent reference to the war on terrorism as a justification for waging war in the Middle East, when in fact anybody who has some understanding about that region knows that what is at stake is the oil.
60% of the oil and gas lies in a region which extends from the tip of Saudi Arabia up to the Caspian Sea basin. It's a very strategic region. And why are they demonizing Muslims, the question is? It's very simple. They're demonizing Muslims because the oil happens to be in Muslim lands.
Now, Chusudowski went on to say, I undertook the calculation that something along the order of 60 to 70%, depending on the estimates of the Wells oil reserves, lies in Muslim countries. So that is why they demonize Muslims, present them as enemies of the Western world. Ultimately, if those lands had been inhabited by Buddhists, they would have demonized the Buddhists.
So, we're in a situation where we have a war of conquest. It's the conquest of oil and gas reserves, of course. It's very clearly indicated in national security documents that the objective of these wars ultimately, of course, this is not something they're going to say in public, but the objective ultimately is to gain strategic control over oil and gas reserves, and also to exclude any kind of competing powers in the region, which includes China and Russia. Well, as you can see from these news articles, Bible prophecy is definitely coming to pass, and it's starting in and around that area of the great river Euphrates.
That's right. Now stay tuned for our next program where Yisrayl Hawkins continues to explain those Bible prophecies. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
And I'm Katan Alexander.
Thanks for joining us.
Everyone please stand. The greatest teacher in the world, the great Kohan Yisrayl Hawkins! Shalom, everyone! You might be seated.
I know Yahweh had to hear that in heaven. That was great. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. Hope you remember where we left off last week. The war is coming. It's definite. We can see it now. Everyone else can too, or at least a lot of them can see it. Those that are not totally spiritually blind can see it. Get my papers organized here. I got so much to cover, and a short time to cover it in. The cloud, of course, that was for y'all. That was for the house of Yahweh. We really need to push this thing. It couldn't have been done by anyone except Yahweh and Yeshua. They're the only ones that have the power to control the firmament, and in that firmament they can actually write letters to us. Listen closely. I'll explain this once again. Yahweh showed me the donkey looking at a cloud in front of him, intensely looking at a cloud in front of him. Now, later, he showed that cloud. In fact, I kept saying, man, I would everybody could see that. As I saw it, as he showed it to me. Well, on the Feast of Trumpets, he did show it to all the elders that was up on top of the building watching for the new moon. He showed that cloud that the donkeys were looking at intensely. The same cloud that he placed in front of the donkey that I saw first. Now, we didn't know what we were looking at that night. We were hunting the new moon, so we wasn't paying any attention to the cloud. But a woman saw the moon and called me and described the cloud to me so I could spot where the new moon was. We could see a piece of the new moon, but we couldn't see the whole thing. And that's the reason she was describing this cloud to me. So later, she played a part in this. But it was after the feast. We made the banner. Then after the feast, before the feast, I saw the what is now our logo, for the House of Yahweh, the great olive tree that sits on top of the sanctuary. And I saw this on one of the commercials, and I said, well, that's strange. That's the same shape as the cloud that was in front of the donkey. Well, we went ahead and made a banner, kept the feast. Then in December, this same woman that described the cloud to me saw the same logo on top of the sanctuary in the commercial, and she called and she said, hey, that tree that's on top of the sanctuary looks like the cloud that was of the night of the Feast of Trumpets that had the moon hidden from you. Well, as I was going off of the stage, the priest said, I think I have a picture of that. I think I took a picture of that, and I'll find it if you want me to, or try to find it. So the next week then, he told me, yes, he found the picture, He put it with the tree, and it fit perfectly, he said. So the cloud he showed to me on the 25th of August, he put it in front of the priest, September the 28th. That was the Feast of Trumpets, or the Feast of Yahweh's 7 works. Like you see right here, the Feast of Yahweh's 7 works. That's what it represents, the Feast of Trumpets. And we're in the last part of it. And Yahshua says, lift up your heads. Be pleased that you have chosen his house. Praise Yahweh. Anyway, we need to push this and make commercials, very believing commercials, and get them out to the world, like the Samaritan woman did. Whey, it's very healthy, and the people who lived the longest on the face of the earth, they drank whey. That's the ones that lived the longest. There's a reason. Because it helps your body to keep from dying inside from all the junk that we're facing right now. It's not the fried food, as you just saw. You don't have to quit eating hamburgers. I started drinking whey instead of drinking tea with the meals, and it's helped a great deal. You might try that. It's a very healthy drink. You could take the men that work outside, if you get you one of these thermal jugs and fill that thing up with whey and take it with you, it also gives you a great deal of energy. But you can't, I don't think you can drink too much, and it's a very healthy drink. Extra virgin olive oil. It should not be used for cooking. Everything I read about it, heat breaks it down easily, and then it starts to grow little animals inside of it. So when you use it the second time, you start eating those little animals that's inside of it that's trying to get rid of it. So if you're going to use olive oil for cooking, don't use the extra virgin olive oil. And if you fry food, don't fry it in the lard. I get that kind of mixed up a little sometimes, because if you just think about it, Circe, that's where you get the word church. Now, the word church and Circe means gathering. Where did she get that name, gathering? She gathered the dead bodies of the Galileans. And she had men gather up these dead bodies and take them to her swine pen, where she fed them to the swine. She ate them herself, it said. She ate her victims. Well, her victims was the children of Galilee. This must have been quite a woman. She must have been one of those that rode a broom. You know, it's just it amazes me, and then it amazes me more that these people. But you know, when I find out they're okay in the use of horses now to eat them, these are the ones that die on the racetracks, I guess, and any others, and serve them on the market. But it's just amazing what is going on in the confused minds. The gathering of these dead bodies, the Galileans, who were murdered and in the Crusades, and then they fed them to the swine. We see the Savior. That's where she gets the word church. You know, they turned it to church because her name itself means gathering also. But if you turn over quickly to Luke the 12th chapter, Luke 12. And get this in your mind along with this word Circe or church. Luke 12. I know this is going to be shocking to many people because they think the word church, is something holy and something you should send your children to. But, of course, it's always that group of people are people who hate righteousness, and they were trying to destroy righteousness. It started with making an open show of it in 1 Samuel, the 8th chapter, 9th chapter, showing where they kept Easter and Halloween and so forth. So you get the religion right there and see that they rebelled against Samuel and Yahweh said they've always revolted against me with their iniquities in verse 9 of that chapter. But here in Luke 13, chapter 13, in verse 1, he said, "At that time there were some present who told him about the Galileans whose blood Pilate had mingled with their sacrifices. But Yeshua rebuked and said unto them, Do not think that these Galileans were sinners above every Galilean, because they suffered such things. I tell you, no, but unless you repent, you will all likewise perish." Speaking to, of course, his the disciples here, and of course, in Yochanan, you got two stories here that's not told the complete story. Turn over to Yochanan now, the 4th chapter, because it's not written all together. It's here a little and there a little. But these people in Galilee, they're the ones that Yeshua set the movement for and told his disciples, don't go around these people, because the work had already been started there by him. And of course, this was not the house of Yahweh. So they did not have Yahweh's protection, but they were set forth as an example. You see a lot of that taking place right now. You see people carrying forth a little bit of holiness, but they're not protected by Yahweh. And Yahweh does know how to protect, and I have a sermon lined up for that to show what we're going through and what we're going to see. But it's very clear that people by the thousands are going to be falling around the house of Yahweh, and we're going to see it either by television, maybe some personally, but we're going to see this slaughter take place again big time. As you could see, these plans were made as the great Kohan Safanya just showed you with the news articles there. We will run these later in the prophetic word and newsletters, of course, where you can have it to read for yourself, underline it, and use it for your teaching in the next few million years as you teach the planets out there. We've got a big job ahead of us, a big job. Praise Yahweh. But this movement here, if you look at chapter 4 of Yochanan and verse 45, I think I got this right. He says, "But when he came into Galilee, the Galileans," we'll look back to verse 43, "and after 2 days he left there and went into Galilee. And Yeshua himself testified that a prophet had no honor in his own country. But when he came into Galilee, the Galileans welcomed him, having seen all the things that he did at Jerusalem during the feast of unleavened bread, for they also went up to the feast." Well, if you remember the Samaritan woman, she said, "Our father said we were to worship in this mountain." And of course, that's what They did. The house of Yahweh was in those mountains, the Galilean mountains, where it had always remained. But, of course, the king changed this and said, you are to come to Jerusalem to worship now. So this is what they did. Look back to 39. Now many of the Samaritans of that city believed on him because of the report of the woman. The woman. Remember that? The woman? The woman whose name is spoken of. Are y'all with me now? What was her name? Write it down and find it for me. And the next time I asked you what was her name, see if you can tell me, okay? Can y'all hear me talking? Okay. Praise Yahweh. The woman, because of the report of the woman who testified, he told me everything that I ever did. So you see how her gossip now, and what we should be gossiping about right now, we could use our gossip constructively by bringing forth these donkeys in the clouds too, as well as the work. So when the Samaritans came to him, they asked him if he would remain with them. So he stayed there 2 days. Then many more believed because of his words, his teaching pertaining to the laws and the prophets, and said to the woman, now we believe not because of what you said, but we have heard for ourselves and know that this is truly the Messiah, the Savior of the world. If you look back to verse 1, start with verse 1. When Yahshua learned that the Pharisees had heard that Yahshua made and baptized more disciples than Yochanan, though Yahshua himself did not baptize, but his disciples, he left Yahshua left Yada and once again set out for Galilee. But it was necessary that he go through Samaria, and here's where he talked to the woman and started the gossip about himself. Started the gossip about himself. Well, now, if you think about this and think about what's taking place right now, you know, we got gossip going out about the house of Yahweh right now, and of course it's going to all the world. It's going through television. It's going through the internet. We're reaching all nations now, and that is being talked about, and it's some feelings are being hurt, of course. Those who want to destroy Yahweh's house. But you've got to remember the protection that Yahweh shows that we have. And if you look at the prophecies and you see like where the beastly system is being prophesied of, ever so often the prophet will put a verse or two about his work. And one of those such scriptures, he points out that there's a place of protection. Another place is where he talks about thousands and thousands falling, but it won't come near you. And of course, he does say he's going to protect this work. It's not going to fall. He's not going to allow it to. First off, we've got to resurrect all who have died before us. We're going to be the ones that's given that power, that authority. We're the sons of men that will receive this. The understanding, Yahweh, if you could get this in your mind, we do have a big job painted in the Scriptures that is pointed out to us that Yahweh already has lined up. He lined this up along with His plan, the plan to create mankind in His own image. The two things that He requires is keep your appointments with Him. Now this is throughout all eternity. We have this we have these appointments with Yahweh. Trust in Him and do what He says. And of course, if you do that, don't go by your feelings, well, I feel like I've let Yahweh down, I'm doomed, I'm done for. Believe what the prophet said. The prophet said, go to the priest and do what he says. Don't trust your own feelings. It'll get you in trouble. Big time. Your feelings go up and down like the tide, and with the tide sometimes, and the moon too, Somebody said it's a full moon. I said, oh no. Stay away from but if you turn over to Isaiah 66, Yahweh shows here his appointments with mankind, and all through the Holy Scriptures he harps on us believing what the prophets have spoken. It wouldn't surprise me if he doesn't have it lined out in the prophets, and we haven't seen it yet, all of it. Future commandments for us to follow in order to get to the moon or the different planets. He does these things. Yahweh can look down in advance and plan a donkey on a cloud billions of years before, have it lined up for the firmament to take care of it. And of course, the firmament itself, He's allowing it to be destroyed somewhat. This is what we see that's what's going on today, is the firmament being destroyed, and of course the earth is suffering for it. It's been going on for years, and the people have suffered drought, they've suffered hurricanes, and earthquakes, but all of this is increasing now, as Yahshua said it would for this time period. But here in Isaiah 66, he talks about the abominations of the God worship here in verse 3. And he shows you there in the last two lines, the God El, they have truly chosen their own ways, eating the swine's blood, drinking the swine's blood. If you think about what Circe did in eating the bodies of the Galileans, now she fed it to swine, and they mixed the blood of the Galileans with their own sacrifices, and then they fed this to swine, which mixed this with swine that they ate. Now, if you remember what Yahweh said would come down to us in the last days through these 12 tribes that He is dealing with right here and is still dealing with throughout the world right now, fighting each other. They're fighting each other over the oil supply, and each one trying to get control of it. We have some articles for next week that will show that the plans that the Catholic Church made for this oil was actually planned in 1928. 1928. That's 6 years before I was born. Now, at that same time, in Yahweh's plan, He had it planned for the House of Yahweh to be established, to bring to light, everything brought to light, so the truth would be known. Now, what the Catholic Church does in her mixed up confusion, probably some of it brought forth, maybe much of it brought forth from eating the bodies of the Galileans, along with the swine, which was a mixture that went into their bodies then, and into their brains. It didn't stop there. These parasites that are taken in, as we're going to see, the parasites that are taken in, they not only multiply, but they mutate into different other kinds of parasites. They enter the brain, which Yahweh calls, he calls that confusion. That's the Hebrew word, means confusion, but it also means different things that we're seeing in the world now, such as mental sickness, and it's much more widespread than I read to you last week. It's many more. They're only putting forth in the statistics the really bad cases. They're not putting forth the ones that are hidden in the body that any minute could cause a person to commit suicide, cause a person to strap on a bomb and try to kill other people with a bomb, cause him to take his own life or other people's lives, even the lives of his children. Now, a pig, if you think about it, a swine, will eat her own children. That's a bad habit. Now, agriculture and its advancement, they put so much meat. You have to put so much meat into the swine food. If you don't, she will have her young and turn around and eat her young. But in mixing certain types of meat in this food and putting it in her trough and letting her eat all she wants at one time, she won't bother her young. So you see the same thing taking place here with Circe, eating her victims or feeding them to the other people. Well, of course, all of this mixture now that Yahweh said in Genesis 49 is going to come down to us today is coming forth in the brains and bodies of the people today, being passed down. I hope none of you have it. It's a sickening thought, I know. But here here we see the abomination, if you looked at Revelations 1, don't turn there right now, but Revelation 17, 1 through 5, you'll see that the Catholic Church is bringing forth abominations. Well, here it's shown the 12 tribes of Israel, the prophets of Jerusalem, the violent men who took the temple, bring forth these abomination and delight. Their souls delight in their abominations, delight in eating the young, delight in eating the swine's flesh that was mangled with the Galileans. They delight in this, and they brag about it. And they chose the word church to represent the rest of their religion, to represent them. That's the word church represents this whole religion that you're seeing out here today, and the confusion and the rebellion. So Yahweh says, I will show you, it says, so I will choose their delusions. It's actually, when that's translated properly, I will show you your delusions. Delusions or confusion. And he says, we will bring, I will bring. No, he doesn't bring it about, but he allows them to bring it about. One thing, by eating the Galileans after they feed it to the swine. This is coming forth in their minds and causing great confusion. Now, if you look at, let's see, verse 5. Hear the word of Yahweh, you who tremble at his word. That is, that word is not tremble. They translated the same word fear. It's actually rejoice at hearing his word. Your brothers who hate you, who cast you out because of my name. Now he's talking about the Samaritans. He's talking about the Galileans. Let Yahweh show his glory. Let us witness your joy. But they will be ashamed. They will be ashamed. Look on down to verse 15. For behold, Yahweh will come with fire. Well, here's your nuclear burning now. He's speaking now of the last days. Come with fire, or nuclear burning, that he described this fire in Malachi, but also back in Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter, having three colors: blast and burning, having three colors and giving you the color of the fallout that comes with the nuclear bomb there also. This is in our book, The Mark of the Beast, in detail. But he comes with fire, that is, after the nuclear fire is Yahweh's coming kingdom that is given to the sons of men. And with his chariots like a whirlwind to render his judgment, should be that we got anger, but it should be judgment, with fury, and his rebuke with flames of fire. That's the nuclear fire or nuclear wars he's going to allow to come to destroy 4/5 of the earth's population. For by fire and his sword will Yahweh plead with all flesh. He's not causing this, he's allowing this. And at the same time, we're saying, his house of Yahweh is saying, come out from among them and be you separate, so you won't partake of these plagues that are coming. Surely anyone in his right mind could see these plans that were made years ago by the governments to do this. And in 1928, they actually made plans to take the oil. This oil, the wars that are coming right now, was actually made, the plans for it in 1928 to actually take over this land. And of course, it shows the popes and the cardinals as leaders of the United States governments there. I think there was a book written on this. We'll try to get that for you too, and show the copies there. But next week we'll have a news clip to show this, Yahweh willing. And the slain of Yahweh will be many. The slain that he allows will be many. They, verse 17, this is Isaiah 66, verse 17, they who sanctify themselves and purify themselves. Now remember, Exodus says, Exodus 31:13, I believe it is, said, keep my Sabbaths so you will know. And you will know it's I who sanctifies you. Don't keep my Sabbaths, and you will know that it is Satan who sanctifies you. Well, of course, or Circe, the church, the gathering. They who sanctify themselves and purify themselves in the gardens, that is, in the arenas, following after the priest in the midst. Remember, the priest now sits on 7 hills, the great city that rules over the kings of the earth, has her tentacles reaching to all parts of the United States and of course, Great Britain. Those are the 2 great armies that Revelation shows that she has control of, that she plans on, of course, using that to take over Asia and to depopulate the earth. Following after the priest in the midst of those who eat the swine's flesh, in the midst of the churches, midst of the Circes, that's where you get the word church. The great Kohan Yehuda has, he could write a book on this, I think, but gobs and gobs of dictionaries and encyclopedias that show this information. It's nothing new. Nobody ever reads it. and when they read it, it doesn't dawn on them what it's saying. But this is where it comes from. And Yahweh is saying to those who bring forth this, who try to sanctify themselves in the churches or in the Circes, who eating the swine flesh, that which is offered to the gods, the gods you remember are the dead rabbis, and Satan being their leaders, the dead rabbis that they claim will answer your prayers. Well, The only prayers they're answering is to make war. That's, just to line up and make war, to try to kill off mankind completely. That which is offered to the gods, and even the rodent, will be consumed together in this great fire, this nuclear burning that is going to take place. For I know their works and their thoughts. It will come that I will gather all nations and tongues, and they will come and see my glory. I will set a sign among them, and those among them who escape, that is, who come out from among them, as Revelations 18, 1 through 5, and don't be partakers of their sins, sins being 1 John 3, 4, shows sin is the transgression of Yahweh's laws. It's no secret that Cersei don't keep Yahweh's laws. The churches don't keep Yahweh's laws. The Catholic Church doesn't. Those who escape I will send to the war-raging nations. Look on over to verse 20. And they will bring all your brothers for an offering to Yahweh out of all the nations. Look on down to verse 21. And I will also take of them for priest and Levites, says Yahweh. Verse 22, for as the new heavens and the new earth which I will make will remain before me, says Yahweh, so will your seed and your name remain. Now this is speaking of course, the house of Yahweh and the work we're doing now. And it will come to pass that from one new moon to another and from one Sabbath to another, all flesh will come and worship before me, keeping these appointments. Yeah, but I thought the disciples did away with these Sabbaths. Sure you did, you liars. That's what Yahweh calls you in 1 John 2, 4. You go around saying, yeah, you know Yahweh, and you don't keep His laws, you're a liar, and the truth is not in you. They will all come. The Sabbath will never be done away with. There are eternal appointments for Yahweh's people. Praise Yahweh. Now, if you can get this in your mind, Yahweh has built up a group, a government, a kingdom that believes what He says. So He can take any one of you and send you out to bring a certain message to the people, like He did with His prophets. His prophets went out in the face of danger, and they preached to the nations. They were persecuted. If you read of what the things that these prophets went through to do this, you'll know that what occurred to us was very light. But the fear was there, the great fear. And in spite of the fear, they did their job. Plus, Yeshua, He said to His disciples, now they're going to kill you. You know they're going to kill you. They're going to persecute you and kill you. I'm sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves, and they're going to kill you. That took place. And the Galileans that He was speaking of here, it was taking place at that time. They were already killing off these people. The apostle Shaul was part of it. What was Shaul? He was a Roman soldier. Who was his leader? The Pharisees. Who commanded the Roman soldiers? The Roman soldiers, the Holy Roman Empire, as it's called, is still alive and well. Now, it split, it divided. It didn't distinguish. It divided, and it took over the earth. And its tentacles reach everywhere in the world today, but mostly in America. And here they have created a vast army that Daniel saw. And he saw two great armies. The other one is Britain. Some Christian writers have come close to this. I know a book that I read called The United States and Britain in Prophecy. But all they could think about was they got all this wealth that was promised Abraham. That's all they think about. Wealth and going to heaven. That's the two things they got in their mind. And of course their wealth is worthless. And going to heaven is another lie. That's not your reward at all. Your reward is to receive the authority that will only be given to the sons of men who become righteous as Yahweh is righteous, believe all that the prophets have spoken, and do exactly what Yahweh says without question. Now, praise Yahweh. And I think you've pretty much proved that. You've proved that you will do that, because I think the sign that Yahweh gave us showed that the branch now, the chosen branch of the vine, get that in your mind. That's the way that should have been translated, by the way, the vine. And you see some translations say the vine, and then hitch your donkeys to the other vine, or the chosen vine. Well, of course, the branch off of a vine is a branch, and that's the reason it was translated branch. But the word there was actually vine, but it's a chosen part, chosen branch of the vine. Well, the donkey is just staring at that branch, that chosen branch. And Yahweh shows there intensely. He's not tied with a rope, but he's tied with loyalty and unity. And that's what you're proving to Yahweh right there. Well, after he shows this in Isaiah 66, you see this same beastly system that's still eating swine's flesh throughout the world. And this may be going on. You know, they may still be feeding people to swines. I don't know. I know that the swine will eat anything that you put in his pen, any kind of meat. They'll eat the buzzards that try to come and take it away from them. And they will go forth and look upon the carcasses. That's you. You will look upon the carcasses. You will come keeping Yahweh's Sabbath, but you can go and look upon the carcasses of the men who have transgressed against me. Transgress? 1 John 3:4. Sin is the transgression of Yahweh's laws. So you'll look upon the men who transgress against me, for their worm shall not die, nor will their fire be quenched, and they will be an abhorrence of all people. And others said there'll be ashes under your feet. Under your feet. Well, here now we see, I wanted to show you this before I run totally out of time, and I didn't even get into the sermon today because of this grabbed my attention, all this news. But this right here is a pork wiener, and they finally came to the conclusion that pork is causing one sausage a day. Just one sausage could lead to cancer. Pancreatic cancer, warning, over processed meat. It says eating one sausage a day or 2 rashers of bacon. How many's heard the name rashes before? Rashes, yeah. Well, of course it means slices, but it's an old word. It's an Okie word, actually. Did you know that? Means slices, but two slices of bacon. They have at the hamburger joints. They show them putting bacon on your all beef, 100% beef patties. They'll lay some slices of bacon on there. Well, that's to shut down your pancreas. Remember that, to give it a cancer, to shut it down. Symptoms, when your pancreas starts shutting down, the symptoms or back pain. Don't get to let your imagination now start running away with you. You don't have it. You don't eat pork. I saw somebody say, "Oh." You got to watch that. Back pain, loss of appetite. I don't see any of that around here. Weight loss, none of that. Bacon. Now, one more thing I want to show you here before I quit. They're playing down the mad cow disease as if we don't have it anymore, but we do. This is a deer that they found in a new place, Utah. Deer infected with chronic wasting disease has been found in a new area in Utah. Now, the feeding the Galileans to the swine, this is what they were doing to the cattle. And this is what they not the Galileans, but they were feeding meat to the cattle. And they were disguising this meat along with molasses and other feed in the cattle feed. And that's what brought this new prion. A prion is a protein, but it's a mutated protein that has little breaks in it. And it can't function as a whole protein, so when it gets in your brain, then these little breaks start shorting out. And your brain is like getting water in a computer. It'll start flashing at you and making all kinds of funny signals. That's what they call mental illness now. These things started way back with the eating of swine's flesh, and Yahweh says don't do these things because it will cause confusion. We'll go into that deeper next week, so everybody that's out there in the world, be sure and get the second one that follows this one. A deer infected with chronic wasting disease has been found in a new area in Utah. They're covering this by calling it, in the people, Alzheimer's disease, and I forgot what the other one is, but it's a mental illness that takes place in the brain once these things take effect. The 20% of Americans are mentally disturbed. That's a far figure from what is actually out there. These are the bad cases that people can see in public, and of course they're listed now, and we can get the statistics on them. But there's more than that are actually disturbed, and the mental illness is running about 90%, more closer to 90% than it is 20%, as they report in this article here. But even 20%, if you think about it, 46 million Americans in 1 year diagnosed with mental illness. 10 years, 10 times that, 20 years. And how many years has this been going on? How many years has it been since they mangled the blood with the swine's flesh of the Galileans, mangled the blood of the Galileans with swine's flesh, and of course this church, this is what it represents: the eating of swine's flesh, putting it in the bodies of the people, in the minds of the people. This is what you're functioning with. Those that eat swine's flesh, your brain is part of that of a pig. And if you could think of what you're bringing your brain down to by feeding it swine's flesh, if you feed it the proper food that Yahweh says to feed it, foods that are clean, your brain will start functioning properly. It'll take a while, but it will. It works. Yahweh's way works. May Yahweh bless you, and I'll turn the service back to the next leader. I love you!